Hey there, welcome to the Collide podcast. I'm so glad you hopped on today. It is 2026, baby. I cannot actually believe that. That's so weird. It sounds like some kind of futuristic movie, but it is right now, right here. So often, you and I and everyone and their brother sets New Year's resolutions right about now. And so we get sort of self-evaluative. And this episode that you're about to listen to with therapist Emily Weidlich, her and I chat about reframing negative thought patterns that steal our joy. And so much of what she had to say felt super helpful and healthy to me. And I hope it blesses you as you can listen to this conversation and really take it into consideration as you set New Year's goals and resolutions. I hope that you will learn to be more kind and compassionate to yourself as a result of this interview. Emily was born and raised in Portland. She is such a sweetie. She holds a master's in counseling, and she played competitive volleyball. She loves animals. She's a talented artist who enjoys painting. And this conversation was just super fantastic. So take a listen. And while you're listening, if you have a friend who you know needs to hear this, press share or copy the link or whatever while you're listening to it. I know I have a few friends that I want to share this to as well. Take a listen. Emily, thank you so much for hopping on in 2026.
Woo! Yeah, thank you, Willow, for having me.
Oh man, I can't even believe I'm saying that. It just doesn't feel real.
Yes.
I am so excited to have you on the podcast today. We have lots of great guests, but I especially love having a therapist on. I think the Lord uses your work so much in the world and in women's lives. And I know there's women listening who will be deeply touched by what you have to say. So I just want to start off by thanking you for taking time and space to come and do this with us.
Yeah, no, thank you. I love what I do, and so getting to, support people from a different platform is fun as well. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, for sure. So we were thinking when we invited you on about having a conversation with you as a therapist on reframing negative thought patterns that threaten to steal our joy. Like in the new year, as everybody's doing the whole setting goals and resolutions and evaluating where their life is and where they want their life to be, there can often be this realization that there needs some reframing that needs to happen in our lives. So I'd love to just jump out of the gate and ask you, how is it possible for someone who thinks negatively to begin to think positively? Is that actually possible? Is this transformation able to happen?
Oh, yeah. And that's a resounding yes, just so we're clear.
Yeah.
Yeah, it absolutely is possible. And, I think a lot of us struggle with negative thoughts a lot of the times because of our internal voice. And our internal voice is typically developed over time throughout the whole course of our lives. And it really stems from, the primary people in our lives. So whether that's our parents or coaches or teachers or just really kind of those primary influences, it also stems from popular media and just kind of culture. So we often have these internal voices that we've kind of internalized, and then they become our viewpoint. They become our framework for how we address just life and what comes our way. So when we're talking about kind of that negative viewpoint or that negative lens, oftentimes that's part of what's being fueled. And then it takes a lot of effort. It really does. So it's possible, but it does take intentionality and awareness that's kind of our framework. So it's possible. It's a whole process to go through in terms of retraining our brains, because that's really what's involved. but yeah, so that's kind of, it is possible, definitely, but there's a lot of background in trying to understand, where did that negativity originally come from? And that's what I would really encourage people to be able to recognize, is that it came from somewhere. When we're talking to ourselves in a negative way, or in a way that's damaging, um, it's something that has been developed. It's not something that's just coming from an internal source. And so that, I think, is an important piece to recognize, because it kind of externalizes the problem a little bit and helps us
Hmm.
understand that there was a process to get here, which means that there's going to be a process that we also have to go through to kind of reframe that.
I love that because it feels like a gentle invitation. Like it took a
Mm-hmm.
while to get here. It might take a while to undo this, instead of feeling this pressure that we have to change the way we think overnight. Before we get into talking about that process, what that process could look like, recognizing internal voices, I mean, I have a million questions for you. I'm just thinking about someone listening. They're in their kitchen right now, or on the treadmill, or in their car, or whatever.
Yeah.
And the ways we listen to podcasts. And they hopped on here today, and maybe they didn't hop on because they think they have like a negative mindset. And I
Mhm.
think a lot of us maybe think negatively and we don't even realize we're doing it. So can we
Mhm.
start with how to spot some indicators that
Mhm.
might, an indicator light that might be saying, hey, the way you're thinking isn't helpful or healthy?
Yeah, well, that's a great place to start. I love that, because that is really part of that awareness, is really even knowing what to look for, right? Um,
Mhm.
so I would say one of the most common and kind of pervasive types of negative thinking really comes from self-criticism. And when that's happening, we're often utilizing this framework of, man, I just need to kind of pick myself up by my bootstraps, and I should be able to do this, or there's a lot of shoulds. It's kind of, which is naturally a comparison. Um, and yeah, so there's a lot of comparison. There's self criticism, saying I should be able to do this better, or I did that so badly. So that's a big component. And one of the reasons why self criticism is actually, we're told in society, that's the way that you improve, that you can identify all the things you're doing wrong, and then you can fix them. And what research has really shown is that self criticism actually, if at all, doesn't really create sustainable change. You might see a little bit of an uptick in, productivity or whatever it is that you're trying to focus on. But long term, it's actually more discouraging than it is motivating. And so the alternative then, and we can talk more about this a little bit later too, but I'll give a little sneak peek, is self compassion, and actually being able to stay curious about your experience, as opposed to jump to assumptions, or just kind of trying to beat yourself into submission a little bit. Like, you just need to do this and then everything will be fine. So self-criticism, I would say, is kind of one of those frameworks that really is hard to pick up on, because again, we're told it's a good thing in many, many ways, and yet it's actually pretty damaging at times. So.
This is such a funny example, and I don't know why this is in my brain, but I have a very intense son. Like anything he does, he's just
Mhm.
like, let's do this. And he's like
Throws himself
intense.
in.
And many years ago, like 5 years ago, my husband and my son put a gym in our garage, and my
Mm.
son was like, "Mom, I want to like do like physical training with you." And
Mhm.
we go in the gym, and he just was like, "You're trash, Mom. You're trash. Like, the only way to build strength is to know you're trash." And it was like this whole
Oh,
experience. We laugh about it now, like 5 years later, because
yeah.
I almost cried. I was like, this is the most unmotivating experience ever. I was like, Aiden,
Mhm.
I'm motivated by positivity. But he had
Mhm.
had an experience, I think, with a coach or something that taught him, like, oh, the way to motivate people is to totally tear them down, so they want to build themselves back up. And I was like, this
Uh-huh.
isn't working for me. I'm never going to want to work out. So I'm
Yeah.
just picturing us, like, that's such an interesting idea that you're bringing to the table, that culture kind of tells us self criticism is a good thing, when in actuality, it's really harmful.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, and I think that's a really great example of exactly how, we're told. And, I was a college athlete as well, actually. And so I can really relate to those coaches' voices of saying, oh my gosh, like you could do so much better than that. And even in that framework, it's not as much as you're trash, but it's still saying you're not enough. And so from a lack, you have to move forward. And I think that, um, if we've accepted Christ, then we actually know that we're already made enough. And it's from that framework that we get to kind of that invitation to continue to grow, knowing that we're actually okay and that we are still safe. So that's kind of the difference between I'm operating as if I have to earn my worth and I have to, create my goodness versus I already believe that I'm loved. And now from that framework, I just get to celebrate, the gift that it is to work out or to play sports or to do whatever that is. And, of course we want to improve. Like that's actually a really beautiful thing. There's nothing wrong with wanting to get better. But when we're berating ourselves, it actually just serves kind of the opposite purpose than what we think it will. So,
Well, and it's interesting that you bring up if we're, a believer in Christ and we operate from this place of knowing we're already loved, because so many people's experience with Christ
mhm.
and Christian community is
Yeah.
around sort of a theology that you are trash, that you do suck, and
Mm,
you are a big bad sinner, and that's all. And
right.
you have to work yourself out of that hole somehow. That's like some people's experience. So I
Yeah.
know we're going to break down, so much of this stuff, but I'm
Mhm.
curious when you have clients come into your office, and obviously you can't speak about specific clients, but just in general, when you have women come in your office, do they tend to come in and go, I know I'm self-debasing, or
Yeah.
are they talking to you? And as they're talking to you, you're picking up on the fact that they are constantly in this mode of self-criticism and they don't even see it.
The latter for sure. Yeah, a lot of it really, when I have clients come in, they are mainly focusing on maybe a behavioral problem in their life or a relational problem. And they're just experiencing a lot of distress. And they're saying, I am desperate for something to change. And I don't really know what that looks like, but I know what's happening is not okay. And I'm, scared, overwhelmed, in pain, whatever that looks like. And so that's their cue that something's not going well, but they're often kind of unsure of what's really kind of the core component of that. And really that is, well, where I've seen, women kind of unaware of what they're actually saying to themselves. And it's really cool. This is part of one of the reasons why I love my work, but getting to kind of highlight that for them and be like, wow, that's actually really sad to hear you say that about yourself. Or, man, that's actually a pretty painful way to view who you are and your worth. Um, and it's pretty remarkable to see kind of their faces shift of like, oh, that is actually really sad versus, no, I believe it's true. I believe that, I'm not worthy. I believe that, I'm doing something wrong all the time or whatever that looks like. So to see them kind of view it through a different lens is pretty, yeah, it's pretty inspiring to get to see that kind of shift in perspective of, wow, do I really deserve to be talked to that way? Um, and that's what's tricky too, kind of circling back a little bit. Those internal voices often have come from somewhere. And so that's where that pain can really manifest as, noticing, oh, well, someone actually did tell me that. And that really sunk in deep. And so that's part of the work of therapy is to rewrite, to reparent, and to invite, when it's appropriate, the Holy Spirit to help shift our understanding of, really who am I? What is my identity and how am I speaking to myself? So that's a lot of like foundational work, I know. And it does like it takes time. It's a journey. But that is part of kind of what long-term change really looks like in being able to rewrite some of those painful moments and those painful voices, and being able to be more in alignment with, what we really are able to believe about ourselves. So
Counseling doesn't have to be complicated. As we say this, you're probably thinking to yourself, yeah, well, you don't know my schedule, or my insurance, or my financial situation. To which we'd say, true. But let us introduce you to a new counseling option, the Collide Counseling Bundle. This is your one-stop resource for your journey to growth and healing. This course includes 12 video sessions with over 7 hours of content from 10 licensed mental health counselors, a registered dietitian, and a career coach on topics such as anxiety, body image, loneliness, and toxic relationships, all of which you can experience from the comfort of your couch. You'll also get a beautiful workbook full of tools for growth, scripture encouragements, and space for reflecting. So what are you waiting for? Get counseling on your time at a price you can afford. Get started today for just $99.
But that is part of kind of what long-term change really looks like, in being able to rewrite some of those painful moments and those painful voices, and being able to be more in alignment with, what we really are able to believe about ourselves. So
I love that you're talking about the power of, first of all, awareness, like becoming aware that we are criticizing ourselves. And you're also showing us, I mean, we really can't do that alone. Like, that's the power of having a therapist or a pastor or a good friend or a spouse or something. Someone's holding up a mirror and saying, do you see this? Like, reflecting back, this is what I just heard you say. That's something I can't often do for myself, but someone else can do for me. So I love that you're sort of illustrating that. Once a woman becomes aware that she's criticizing herself, what are some questions that you ask that maybe we can ask ourselves that help us identify whose voice this is? Like, you call them internal voices, but you've also suggested that they're connected to a past experience. So how do we draw the line from, okay, I hear what this voice is telling me. Where did it come from? Where did I first pick it up?
Yeah. No, that's a great question. I think, so maintaining that sense of curiosity is kind of a big part of that. Because often when we first hear, oh yeah, I am speaking to myself, in a really negative way or very meanly, then we start to be like, oh my gosh, I'm so horrible to myself. Why can't I just stop? So then we kind of just pile it on a little bit. And so I would just invite anybody who's listening to just be aware that we're just noticing, and it's okay to just be honest with kind of what is coming up for you. And if you notice that you feel frustrated towards yourself, that's okay. But we need to acknowledge that. And so just noticing and kind of without a lot of angst, just kind of saying, okay, this is kind of the voice that I'm hearing, and asking yourself, like, I wonder if there's anything that this voice reminds me of. Maybe that's like a moment in time or a period in our life. Maybe this voice comes out a lot more around certain subjects, like, for instance, New Year's resolutions, or any goals that we might have. And in that, then we can start to piece together, maybe I did just have an experience where I had this goal and I pursued it with a single mind, and I read this book, and that really kind of cemented this approach that I just need to be harsh on myself, and then I can fix all the problems in my life. And then I'll finally feel peace. So maybe it's that, or maybe it is, wow, I do remember that, my parent actually focused a lot on the ways that I wasn't performing well when I was doing many other things that were really great, but they just continued to come back to the areas that I needed to kind of shore up. And that felt really defeating. So it kind of is just really recognizing, what are some themes? And sometimes we don't know right away, and that's okay. I don't think we always have to go all the way back to start to shift kind of in the present moment what our voice sounds like, because we get to choose right here and now, which is a gift. But it can definitely be helpful just to understand our own stories and to foster that self-compassion of, like, man, that has been really hard to hold that and then to even sustain that throughout my life. So
Mm.
it kind of just creates a little bit more kindness towards ourselves.
You used a word that I don't want to just skip over because I think it might be an interesting thing to discuss
Mhm.
and maybe something that people aren't familiar with, or some people aren't, which is use the word reparent.
Mm-hmm.
Can you
Sure.
talk to us about what that means and why it's important?
Yeah, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's a really powerful concept that basically stems from the fact that when we're children, we don't always have healthy and safe parents. And that is a really unfortunate reality of a really broken world. But that is super real. And so, a lot of the times when we have pain in childhood, that exists within us, it doesn't just go away. And so, reparenting is this process of, as an adult, connecting with this part of you that experienced that pain and helping them through this kind of almost framework of, you can use parts language, which is like there's a part of me that is present as an adult, gets to make their own choices. But there's also a part of me that experienced a lot of pain when I didn't have choice and I didn't get to choose my parents. And so, kind of the interaction between the two is this invitation to, meet yourself in a really kind and compassionate and parental way. It can look very different depending on your modality as a therapist and all of that. But really, it's just approaching that child self with kindness and understanding and actually being what that child self needed in that moment. And so that's offering it often just empathy, compassion, safety, and saying, hey, I hear that, this situation feels unsafe. If we're feeling kind of activated as an adult, and getting to say, hey, I'm hearing you and I'm going to take steps to set some boundaries here because I can choose now, but I'm hearing that you're upset and you're scared and it makes sense based on your experiences. So it's that opportunity to make different choices based on the needs of that inner child. So that's kind of the framework. I hope that it's a
No,
pretty broad.
no, I love it so much, and I'm actually laughing on the inside, and this is true confessions. But I had a moment this year where I was triggered,
Mm,
and I like some childhood pain stuff was
yeah.
triggered, and I didn't know that's what was happening in the moment. And
Mm,
the
mhm,
way that I acted, I felt ashamed about afterwards,
mm,
in a circumstance. And so I took this to my therapist. And as you're talking, I can hear my therapist. She always does this thing. She kind of rubs her
mhm.
chest,
Yeah.
like right up here by her neck in circles. And she says something like, what she said to me, but now I've since realized she's saying what you're basically saying, which is like, what did the part in you that's a little girl, what did she need in that moment? And
Mhm.
I had never thought about when I had this triggering experience,
Yeah.
what I needed, like what the little girl in me needed in that moment. And when I started to like really think about that, that was such a like unique idea of like,
Mm,
oh, how do I parent that girl that was like triggered in that moment? And if I would have done that, like, and I don't mean this to shame myself, but if
mm,
I
yeah.
had that tool, if I
Mhm.
would have known about it, I think I wouldn't have had the wounded reaction I had, which caused
Mhm.
a whole host of other weirdness. And so,
Yeah.
I love this idea of reparenting, and I think it can be life changing.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's like, oh, wait, am I like multi personality? Like my adult self is talking to my child self? What do you have
Yeah,
to say
yeah.
about that, Emily?
Yeah, totally. No, I've definitely had a lot of clients be like, this is interesting."
Yes, it
For
is.
sure. So it's a very understandable reaction. But yeah, it's basically, I totally understand where the skepticism and maybe even discomfort comes from, but it does make sense in that. And I use this kind of framework with clients and explaining it is basically like in different situations, we show up differently. There's different parts of us that pull forward. In one setting and maybe at work. And then at home, we might have some different traits that actually come out a little bit more. And so it's just recognizing that there are different parts of ourself that it can just be helpful to kind of isolate them a little bit and say, oh, this is one part of me that has kind of its own agenda. Like, for instance, the work part of me wants to be really productive and helpful and all these things. But then at home, like, my goal is to be present and just enjoy and kind of sit back, right? So there's different motivations there of those different parts. And so it's just different kind of language, especially if you tend to be more creative, you might really enjoy that framework. It can be really helpful for clients to kind of even imagine these different parts and to feel like, oh, okay, I can see them and I can understand them. And once we can see and understand, then we often can empathize and connect with them. So, so it's kind of this whole thing, but it can definitely be helpful for people.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting that it feels so foreign to be invited to minister to yourself. Like, I think a lot of us, even like if you were a leader in high school or something, there's like clubs and there's little work. I remember this in high school, like workshops on how to be a good listener and how to, like in our lives, we know we need to love our neighbor and like care for a friend and like have compassion for a friend, but we haven't really been taught how to have compassion for the parts of ourselves that really need it. And so I think that's a really interesting idea. Tell us how we can, or what are some tools we can put in our tool belt to get better at this self-compassion thing?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So tools specifically, being able to, again, acknowledge first what's going on. So that awareness is a really big component of that. The other piece is really paying attention practically to your tone of voice. So some of us have a very audible voice in our head when we're talking. Others are just kind of like there's thoughts flying through. So that can look a little bit different. But really noticing like, man, am I holding a lot of tension in my voice? Is it loud? Is it harsh? What is that really like? If I were to say this out loud, how would it sound? And that can be really helpful to start to shift of, okay, how can I soften that? What does it look like just to quiet even my body? So it's kind of this mind-body connection piece as well. And to start to then practice curiosity. So that's where you're practicing questions. I wonder what's going on for me right now. I wonder, what I'm feeling right now. I wonder where this desperation to change is coming from. And just assuming that there is an answer. Sometimes, again, we don't always know what that is right away. So it might take some time, and that's where we get to practice patience with ourselves, and again with that kind of kindness and compassion of, okay, it's okay that we don't know it right now, and we can take time to figure that out. There's no rush. So kind of slowing down is a part of this too. It's hard to do compassion quickly. Say like, oh, care about you, bye. Right. So being patient and soft and gentle with ourselves is kind of that heart posture. But then practically, it also looks like, what does our tone of voice sound like? What questions are we asking? And then at that point, are we able to empathize? So that's kind of an empathy statement of, okay, it makes sense that I'm feeling whatever emotion it is because of this. And that's actually something that we're taught in school is as a foundational concept is giving an empathy statement. And when you're doing that for a client, you're saying you feel blank because blank. And so you're pairing an emotion with a reason to help somebody make sense of what's going on for them. And so we want to try to do that for ourselves. It makes sense. And so there's something about, and I actually say that to my clients a lot, like, wow, so we can see that it makes a lot of sense, and for instance, Willow, in that situation that you brought up, it sounds like you were able to get to that place where you're like, wow, it actually made sense that I responded that way because that little girl was coming out and there was something there that I didn't realize. And so there's something about that is so relieving, and it really takes the intensity of our distress down. It's pretty powerful. So that's kind of some of the tools. And to prop you in the work you do, and my therapist,
I don't know in that specific example if I could have gotten there on my own. Maybe I will in the future, but in that
Yeah.
specific example, I needed her to reflect back to me, this makes sense because, and she connected old childhood trauma with what I was experiencing in a modern day moment that
Yeah.
I hadn't connected for myself. And so that
Mhm.
is the power of taking some of these really sacred, big um things in our mind and heart and plopping them down with someone who's trusted, who can kind of help us make sense out of things that
Yeah.
don't make sense to us. It's
Yeah.
hard to sort out everything on our own.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, that's part of the reason why we are social beings, right? Is, we weren't made to be in isolation. And yet sometimes too, and I think, in just the way that I present counseling as kind of, a tool, um, some of us have really supportive, friend groups or family members or mentors, things like that. Some of us don't. And so that's especially important then to be able to have access to somebody. But even then, a lot of the times those individuals have such intentional, good intentions and intentional hearts, but they haven't been trained in how to sit with somebody in their most vulnerable moment. And what I've seen and heard from people is that, it's vitally important to have other support people, but to be able to access, professional support, just kind of takes that healing process and makes it a little bit easier to be a part of. Because we're imperfect, and this is true as well for counselors. We're imperfect people, but we've done a lot of training. And I had supervisors really hone me and saying, hey, you need to adjust your approach here. Whereas our friends and family haven't really had that opportunity. It's not a personal failing. It's just that isn't something that they've, needed to focus on, in the same way. So it's just a bit of a more, a more intentional and kind of trained space. But yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So we talk a lot around here about colliding with Jesus, this idea
Mhm.
of running into Jesus or him running into our lives. And when that happens, you see this in the New Testament. Everyone Jesus ran into, they
Mhm.
were left more whole than broken. There was a transformation that took place. There was a before and an after. And,
Yeah.
we have a God who speaks. He speaks
Mhm.
to us. And so as we're these people who've experienced wounds and brokenness and mess and, relationships that have been hurtful and harmful, we've developed these internal voices where we often continue to take the wounds we've experienced and continue to wound ourselves, which wounds our lives. And it's this ongoing thing.
Sure.
And surely in your work, and I'll even ask you for your personal life, have
Mhm.
you found Jesus's voice? How do you allow Jesus's voice to be louder than your internal voices to
Mhm.
bring the healing that he longs for your life?
Yeah. 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 I mean, I think, on a personal level, that has absolutely been instrumental. And I think too, you'd said earlier that a lot of us who identify as Christians have, been kind of, um, have been exposed to this rhetoric that I'm so broken, I'm so horrible of a person. And from that framework, I need Jesus, almost as if we're trying to kind of justify, this longing that we feel for Christ. And really, what the Lord has done in my own life and in my journey with Him is to recognize that by focusing so much on my own failings or my own brokenness, I'm actually missing the opportunity to celebrate him. And not as if that's, something bad, but he's kind of freed me from, this need to really focus and be kind of self-critical. Because he's kind of inviting me to say okay, but also yeah, you have your failings. You're human. That's, yep, I know that about you. And then he's like, but look at how beautiful I am. And look at how much I love you. You can just see how much of a shift that would look like if we did that first. And I'm not saying that we ignore, sin in our lives or brokenness that we feel or pain. But when we're putting him at the center in the forefront of our mind and of our brain space, it really transforms how we then address our hurts, because we're bringing them to him. We're also operating from the standpoint like, wow, he loves us. Like, he's a God that loves. And so then we're able to offer that softness back to, the parts of us that feel really, really scared or really broken. So that's kind of part of my own journey in that. But also being able to really just intentionally invite the Holy Spirit, knowing that, wow, transformation does not come on its own. And like, we're not meant to do that all on our own. And regardless of where you're at, I work with clients, from a faith background or not. But being able to just recognize like, wow, there is something in someone that's out there that's bigger than us, that is in control, that's, recognizing that we're not the end all be all of the world can be so freeing. And, obviously if we are Christians, then we're able to say like, okay, I need help. I can't do this on my own. And so how can, the Lord step into that? So really it's just asking an intentional question. And again, being patient for that answer, because it can come up in many different ways. But oftentimes we kind of assume that, like the Lord will just step in. And I really believe that, the Lord is respectful and very kind. And sometimes he does shake us up a little bit. But I think often he's waiting for us to pay attention to him, and not in like a, condemnation kind of framework, but really like, I'm just really excited for when you're going to call on me, because I see what you're going through. I see the way that you're speaking to yourself. And man, I just would love if you would ask me what I think about this, because I have so many thoughts, right? So viewing this, just this opportunity to connect with the Lord as, something that he delights in and is excited for, I think also kind of helps shift our framework of, I'm not coming from, this point of shame and pain, but instead I'm able to just come and bow before him and, surrender, knowing that I'm safe. So,
Emily, I know we could talk about this topic all day and we won't be able to, but before we jump off, I really am hoping that as I think about people listening, in this idea of reframing negative thought patterns that steal joy. Can you give some examples of a woman says or thinks this, like her inner voice is saying this, and here's what it looks like to reframe that statement into this, and maybe give us a few examples so we can picture, that's what the reframing could look like for me in my own life?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think, and that's part of that corrective experience, I think, is hearing something different, can be really helpful. So I love that. So especially with the new year, a lot of the times, we're doing life review. We're also looking to the future. And so, some of those negative patterns might be looking back and saying like, man, I totally failed this last year. I didn't hit any of my goals. I didn't do anything that I wanted to do. I had some really hard things come up, and that was just like, what a waste might be how you're feeling. And a couple things there that I just want to speak to. When we are uncomfortable, when we're grieving, we get really desperate. And out of that desperation, I think, comes that self-criticism. And it's kind of that breeding ground, because when we're self-critical and we're blaming ourselves for something, then that means that we can change it in the future. So it's almost like this internal defense mechanism that says, okay, I can make sure that this doesn't happen again. When in reality, there's a lot of life that is out of our control. So it's kind of promoting this false narrative. So that's that negative belief that's saying, man, I failed, and therefore, that's a me problem. An alternative approach to that would be just acknowledging that maybe there was grief this last year. When we've had a goal and we miss it, it's disappointing. It's really natural to be disappointed and sad about that. But we can deal with the emotion. But what's damaging is when we say, I'm a failure, which is often what's underlining kind of that self-criticism, is an identity statement. So we can say, man, I am really sad that I didn't get to do this thing that I'd really hoped to do. Man, that's a bummer. Or man, it was really a hard year. And so reframing that could be, okay, well, I didn't get to do the things that I wanted to, and that's really hard and that's really sad. I wonder what are some of the things that got in the way that makes that make sense. So it's often that compassion and increasing our understanding of, what did go wrong? Let's actually look at that. Because self-criticism would just say, well, you're just a failure, so why would we even look at it? But self-compassion, say, man, I'm assuming that there was some things that got in the way. Maybe you had a health scare, or maybe you were having a really difficult time with your kids and that needed to be your focus. And these aren't excuses, by the way. I just want to call that out. Because they are something that actually makes sense. And sometimes excuses feel like, oh, I'm just brushing it away. We're actually addressing it. That's kind of the beauty of this. We are addressing it. But we're also recognizing that there needed to be flexibility. So getting to say, I'm a failure versus, okay, there were some really hard things that happened this year. And I wonder what was a proponent of that. And then the other piece too, as we're kind of, in the New Year spirit here, as we look forward, we might say something like, man, if I could just work out every single day, or if I could, whatever that looks like, we always kind of pinpoint very specific behaviors or situations that if I could just do blank, then I would feel okay, or then I would feel valuable, then I would feel better. And so that's actually, that might sound positive, and some of us might even believe that. But really, that's that desperation speaking. That's saying, I need something to change and I'm desperate for healing here. And so if we can speak to that and say, like, the reframe would be, man, I'm feeling really uncomfortable right now. Or, man, I'm in a lot of pain. And so that makes me really desperate for change. I also know, and so speaking truth, I also know that, change doesn't come quickly, that this is going to be a process, and that setting a rigid goal often sets me up for failure than it does success and motivation. So kind of shifting, some of those internal thoughts towards like having little frameworks in your mind, like progress over perfection. I'm sure people have heard that before, or something is better than nothing. Those are kind of those frameworks that offers self-compassion and helps increase motivation versus, man, I didn't do the thing that I'd set out to do. But then we're kind of shifting and retraining our brain to recognize, like, okay, but what did we do? Did we do one day this week? That's amazing. Or even 5 minutes, right? Or we thought about it. That's actually improvement. So kind of training our brains to really recognizing, like, what was the little win? And how did we move closer to that goal? That's part of that self-compassion. It's getting really consistent at noticing, what's been helpful, what's gone well.
So helpful, Emily. You are a gem, and I'm so grateful that you hopped on. I know that in the new year, we tend to do a lot of self-evaluation, and we can be really hard on ourselves as we set goals. And so I just find this conversation to be extremely helpful and healthy, and I appreciate all that you do in the world. I know there's going to be people who want to connect with you and the work that you're doing. How can they do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I work at a New Day Counseling Center. It's in Northeast Portland. And you can feel free to go on our website. It's just a New Day Counseling Center. And my profile is there if you want to reach out via email, or we have a little submission form that you can fill out too. You can feel free to put something in there. But whether it's me or one of my colleagues, you would be in great hands. Just there's a lot that we deal with. So it'd be an honor to partner with anybody that's needing that extra support.
Thank you so much, Emily.
Yeah, thank you so much, Willow. It's been very fun to chat with you.
Friend, I hope that was a helpful conversation, and that you will take the time to not only make room for awareness or for someone else to reflect back to you what you are saying and feeling about the way that you're talking to yourself, but also that you might enter into a new way of talking to yourself, that you might reframe the way that you think about yourself and really see some movement this year in God reordering things and re-speaking truths over you so that those nasty lies can go packing and those old wounded voices can take a hike. My hope is that you would, like Emily talked about, you would get more curious about yourself and be able to make sense of why you feel the way you do and why you talk to yourself the way that you do, and that God could reframe all of that and you could become more whole. And as a result, feel less messy and hard on yourself. So friend, keep colliding with Jesus. He loves you so very much. And if you need a reminder today, remember, Jesus would do anything for you, has done everything for you, would even give up his life so you can find yours. That's how loved you are. So there's no room for beating yourself up and self-debasing. There's only room to receive this great, great love. Keep colliding, and we'll catch you next week.